Welcome back to another AP World History video lecture, except this time, dun, 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 we're done. Well, kinda. So we're done with the major curriculum that we're going to be looking at, but now we got to go back and review. Dun, dun, dun. I know, but actually it's a good thing, and here's why. We've got a lot of time to review here, and we're going to basically be able to take apart the units we've looked over. So like this first review is going to be a combination of units 1 and 2, because the two go together really nicely. But here's the cool part about this, guys. To be quite honest, now that we get to break this stuff down and get ready for the AP exam, it's actually a little bit shorter. We don't have to go quite as much into depth. Some of the big illustrative examples that you guys are going to need, so those core examples you got to memorize, you guys are going to get in the blog that I'll be posting and under review sheets. So what we want to look at here really are themes and some illustrative examples. We want to have some core factual material that you can use. Why? It doesn't matter what part of the test you're going to have. Whether it's multiple choice or if it's writing, you got to have those big themes, those big examples. So here's my thesis. Yep, still got a thesis statement, even for the reviews. We're looking at the two big themes for the time period, and for us in the first two units, it's governance and trade. How did societies early on govern their societies politically? What did they do with trade? And how did the two kind of overlap with each other? Okay, so let's start off then with those themes, governance and economics. The focus here is going to be on a number of different regions around the world, including East Asia, Middle East, Southeast Asia, Africa, Mesoamerica, and Europe. We're going to go through each section, each region, and we're going to talk about their governance and their economics, and then how they're all connected to each other at this time. So let's start off with East Asia. East Asia is considered to be China. Okay, that's what we call East Asia. The big challenge there was, how do you manage such a large population? And you probably remember all the dynasties that we talked about this year. The ones we didn't talk about because they came before at the very beginning. Those are ones like the Qin and the Han that we didn't talk about them, that you don't have to know them for the test. We started off with the Sui, the Tang, and the Song. All of them adopted Confucianism, the idea of filial piety, family obligations, hierarchy, and patriarchy. Societies dominated not by men so much, although yes, dominated by men, but more that symbolism of masculinity. Okay. The other side at this time period, the other challenge was trade. China had a real fear about incoming trade and ideas. Why? Because Confucianism is about maintaining that purity of culture. And the problem is that when you get trade, you get new ideas. And remember the pattern there, diffusion and syncretism, right? So like Buddhism diffuses into the society and then mixes together with the ideas that are there. Now at the time, the Sui, the Tang, and the Song had been expanding. They expanded into places like Tibet, Manchuria, and Vietnam. Okay, and as they did that, they brought back goods, like, for example, champa rice. They also built the Grand Canal to connect up northern and southern China. But this also brought in new ideas, and so it led to a diffusion and then syncretism into Neo-Confucianism. The idea, if you did your good filial behavior, if you were a good member of the family, then at that point you got spiritual rewards. You went to what they considered to be heaven, or what they would have obviously called nirvana. So there were two big branches of Buddhism at this time period, Theravada and Mahayana. You also hear another one called Tibetan. Okay, there's a lot of interesting stuff there to talk about, but here's what I want you to remember for the AP test. What's important was that Buddhists were building these sects, like Theravada and Mahayana, to adapt to trade. So what they told merchants and traders was, look, if you do the right rituals, you can achieve nirvana. That's not what the original Buddha taught. That's an adaptation to trade. Okay, if you do what's good, you don't have to worry about detaching from everything. We'll give you some time to do that. Okay, so next up is the Middle East. So in the Middle East, remember, Islam began in 600, and Muhammad's big mistake, you might remember, was setting up a new leader. That was the big mistake a lot of leaders made at that time period. They didn't set up a really good process for the next leader. When he dies, we get those two sects, Shia and Sunni Islam. Okay, so the Shia Muslims believe that the next leader should come through Muhammad's bloodline, and they believe that that guy Ali should be the next one to come through the bloodline. The Sunni believe that it should just kind of bubble up. Whoever is like the best person to do that job will know, because they're going to be faithful, they're going to be charismatic. It's obvious that Allah has chosen that person to be that case. Now, what we end up with is a battle between the Shia and Sunni that are still going on today. Now, when that's all done, we end up with two caliphates, or kingdoms, the Umayyads and the Abbasids. And these you have to memorize. You got to remember that the Umayyads are Sunni, the Abbasids are Shia. Okay, and the big issue with these caliphates is what to do with minorities. As they spread out throughout the Middle East, they come into contact with Jews and Christians. And this is where we get that complexity of Islamic history. So these minorities, Jews and Christians, are known as Dhimmis, or people of the book. They are considered to be equal brothers. They are not considered to be somehow less than, but they did have to pay the jizya tax, right? And so that meant they had to pay a replacement for somebody in the military, and that leads into secondary status. And even though in Islam it's not really taught that Jews and Christians are second class, in actual practice they were oftentimes treated like that. And so because of that, that's the complexity in Islam, like all religions, is that you have what's stated and then you have the actual cultural practices, and that's going to lead into a tension from there on out about how to treat religious minorities. Another big thing that's important about Islam is its continued practice and participation in the Silk Roads in the Indian Ocean, where we see a huge transfer of knowledge. You know, it was the Muslims who, as they expanded out, conquered areas in which they came to the knowledge of Greek knowledge and philosophy. So all those great Greek philosophers that we study them because the Muslims took all their books and protected them for centuries and actually followed a lot of the philosophy and mathematics and developed incredible new ideas. Ibn Battuta, you might remember from talking about in class, was the Muslim who went basically from China all the way over to northern Africa. And why did he do this, or why was he capable of doing this? Because the Muslims created a vast empire of trade and governance. Now, it was multiple different empires, it wasn't just one, but it was an area called Dar al-Islam, or the House of Islam, in which somebody like Ibn Battuta could travel from one area to the next and really not have to worry about safety. He was protected in all the areas he went. The last major thing about Islam that we should remember is that sect called Sufism. So Sufi were people who approached God through their emotions, not through the letter of the law. And Sufis very much related to the common person. And so they were sort of the warriors who went out and spread, not through violence, but through peace. In fact, that was their belief. They would spread ideas to commoners throughout the area, and people could relate to them because their belief in religion was that it was about intuition, experience, emotion. So they're extremely important within the world of Islam. Okay, now let's switch over to Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, what's important is the Indian Ocean trade. Why? Because there we have a number of different kingdoms, okay, within that area, like the Rajput, the Khmer, the Majaput, the Sinhala dynasties. There are just a ton of these. Do you have to memorize all the names of these? No, you don't have to memorize. You should have a few of them. But here's the big thing I want you to remember. They were protected because they were islands, and so they had very strong kingdoms, and it was very hard to conquer them. But they were areas of immense trade and mixture of ideas like Confucianism, Buddhism, Christianity, and all these others kind of like came together, and they would synthesize as ideas in that area. And we have a lot of monuments like the Borobudur monument that demonstrates that expansion of like Buddhism out into Southeast Asia. Okay, now let's go to the other side of the world, to the Americas. What's important there is the importance of trade. You know, a lot of times people think of like the Aztecs and the Incas, that there was no connection, no trade going on. It's not really true. What happened within this region of the world was natives adapting to their local environments and setting up systems of governance and trade. Good example in America, in what today we would call the Southwest. So that's areas like today, like New Mexico and Nevada and Utah. We see the Pueblo people who established cities out of rock, in which in this incredibly difficult desert environment, they basically by hand built whole cities out of rock. Or let's go to the Aztecs and the Incas, right? They established hierarchies there. So in the Aztecs case, we had an empire of 2 million people, in which there was a central kingdom with priests, sacrifices, a religion to the sun god. Or maybe the Incas in the Andean mountains, very difficult environment to live in, and yet they established a vast empire. And how did they do that? Well, they provided incentives to their emperors to go out and conquer. Okay, you didn't get to inherit land from your dad. You had to go out and conquer. And then when they conquered, they would tell the people they conquered they could be in a mita. Meaning the mita was, you do work, you got to do work. But if you do that, we're going to provide you with shelter, we're going to provide you with food, we're going to provide you with safety. Okay, next up is Africa. There we get a whole variety of civilizations. So in Western Africa, we get kingdoms that syncretize with Islam. Remember, Mansa Musa is, spreading gold throughout the area, right? Connecting up with the Middle East. You get the tribal areas in Central Africa. okay, in which you had a number of what were called secret societies, in which there were small tribes that ran by family obligations. In Eastern Africa, we had huge port cities built by the Bantu, who had migrated down to Eastern Africa and then used those areas to establish port cities that were called the Swahili city-states to establish trade across the Indian Ocean. In Ethiopia, this is very important. Remember this in class. A lot of times people have forgotten this. Very important. A Christian empire was established under the sect of Christianity known as Coptic Christianity. Why is that important? Because remember, Northern Africa is primarily Muslim. Ethiopia is Christian. In the long term, that's going to create some tension, and it's going to create some alliances between Ethiopia and Europe. And you want to remember, too, economically, that this is the area for the Trans-Saharan trade route that connects North Africa up into the Indian Ocean. We have everything from goods to including slaves that are transported out in this region. Okay, last up, Europe. Europe's important for this concept of feudalism. So feudalism is in many parts of the world. We want to remember feudalism in Europe, though. Lords owning land, serfs working on that land. Also remember the split politically, okay, that happens here. So we have Rome splitting off from Byzantium. In Rome, you have a papal structure. The papal structure was a pyramid structure, the Pope in charge, bishops below, then priests, then the people. Often, Byzantium, though, is a little bit different. It's called a patriarchal structure. Now, you might think of that as like patriarchy, right, with men? No, I mean, it was a patriarchy, but that's not what I mean. The patriarchal structure in Byzantium was basically all the bishops kind of like worked together. And the patriarch was more of a facilitator than being in charge. Now, who was in charge of this? There was somebody, the emperor, and he was in charge of something called Caesaropapism. Caesar being over the Pope. Okay, that's very important. In Western Europe, the idea was the Pope was over the emperor. Okay, and that's why in Western Europe there was this fight over power between the popes and the bishops. Now, please remember what's so important about the difference between these two. When Rome falls, Europe is kind of a mess. Falls into all these different countries. Okay, now why does that matter? Well, in the long term, that's going to be a problem for them until we hit the Industrial Revolution, because then it's going to be a competition of states. That's going to allow for a lot of innovation to take place. Okay, what are our takeaways here? Number one, there were common forms of political organization and governance across all these cultures, including hierarchy, patriarchy, and family obligations. Number two, but there are significant differences due to the adapting to geography and local cultures. East Asia is about filial piety. Middle East is about monotheism. Southeast Asia was about trade and diffusion. Mesoamerica about adapting to difficult desert environments. Africa was at the center of trade. And Europe was dealing with the fall of the Roman Empire. And number three, last off, economic trade leads to two really big things: diffusion and syncretism. That happens for both goods and ideas. Okay, that's our beginning for reviews, guys. Keep with it. Keep strong. We're leading up to the AP exam. You're going to be ready, and you're going to take this exam. I can feel it. See you in class.